Sugar, it's in your kitchen right now, costs pennies, seems completely ordinary, but this white crystal once sold for more than gold. It powered the largest forced migration in human history. It built the factories of industrial revolutions. And the same molecule that caused centuries of suffering. Engineers are now redesigning it to fight climate change. This is the 10,000-year story of how a wild grass from a forgotten swamp became the most powerful molecule on Earth. 10,000 years ago in the highlands of New Guinea, a group of Neolithic farmers set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the world. In a place called Coke Swamp, around 8000 BCE, now recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, they encountered a wild grass called Saccharum robustum, stalks as hard as bamboo, barely 5 to 7% sugar, and they decided to change it. What followed was a multi-millennial engineering project that modern geneticists still study. The sophistication of this early farmer surprises even today's archaeologists. Excavation at Cook have uncovered drainage channels, precisely angled ditches, raised garden beds dating back to 7000 BCE. These were not people just scratching seeds into dirt. They terraformed an entire wetland, digging trench networks that converted unworkable swamp into elevated mounds where sugarcane could thrive in conditions that would have killed its wild ancestor. Teams of farmers using fire-hardened wooden chicken sticks called GM, some measuring up to 10 feet, about 3 meters long, heaved in unison to break heavy salts of clay, moving pounds of soil without metal or draft animals. Their genetic achievement was equally stunning. While sugarcane stalks contained fiber content exceeding 30% and barely 5 to 7% sugar. Over centuries of careful selection, these farmers spread that sugar content up to 12 to 16% sucrose in thick, succulent stalks, while reducing fiber to just 10 to 15%. Bitter compounds decreased, sweetness increased. Woody fiber softened into juicy pulp. A single domesticated stalk weighing roughly 4 pounds, about 2 kilograms, now contains 600 to 800 calories. Essentially a portable power bar for Neolithic laborers. These early geneticists created Saccharum officinarum, the noble cane that will eventually conquer continents. And here's what makes this story even more interesting. They built a complete agricultural system around it. Pigs rooted through freshly harvested fields, aerating the soil and devouring pest larvae that would have destroyed future crops. Farmers fed those pigs the fibrous bagasse left after juice extraction. And modern isotopic analysis of ancient pig teeth from Pacific sites show a distinctive C4 plant signature, a carbon marker unique to grasses like sugarcane. Proof that these animals lived on a diet heavy in cane. Pigs became living banks, a way to store surplus agricultural labor in the form of protein and social prestige. A closed-loop economy operated in New Guinea 10,000 years before anyone coined the phrase circular agriculture. Sugarcane didn't stay on that island for long. The Austronesians, the greatest seafarers the ancient world ever produced, carried it with them when they launched the most ambitious migration in human history. Around 30,000 BCE, these maritime peoples originating from the island of Taiwan set off in outrigger canoes on voyages that would eventually colonize a third of the planet's surface. Over 2 millennia, they spread from Madagascar in the west to Hawaii and Easter Island in the east. Tucked carefully into those canoes, brought among with historians called the canoes plants. Sugarcane traveled with those sailors. Cane stalks were uniquely suited for sea voyages. Unlike tubers that could rot or seeds that could spoil, cane stalks carried their own water supply and energy. Wrapped in them moss or leaves, A coating could remain friable for weeks, then sprout rapidly in moist soil upon landing. The linguistic trail maps this journey with striking clarity. Linguists have reconstructed the Proto-Austronesian word for sugarcane as sibas or tabus. That word became tubu in Malay, tubo in Filipino, to in Hawaiian, and ko in Chinese. Across 15,000 miles of open ocean, nearly 25,000 kilometers, the word followed the plant. And at archaeological sites along this migration corridor, Pythalis evidence microscopic silica bodies that survive in soil long after plants decay confirms the path. At Nexheberan in the Philippines, dating to 2200 BCE, evidence of sugarcane accompanies rice cultivation. At Wetam Island in the Bismarcks, Labita culture layers contain definitive proof that cane had reached the Pacific launchpad. Sugarcane reached the Indian subcontinent by 1500 BCE, and Vedic texts from this period mention Iksu as a plant associated with ritual purity and divine sweetness. People chewed raw stalks or drank fresh juice during this era. Nothing more. The chemistry of crystallization still lay 15 centuries in the future. Turning sugarcane juice into solid sugar crystals require chemistry that bordered on alchemy. Ancient India achieved this breakthrough around 350 CE during the Gupta dynasty period in the Magadha region. And that accomplishment changed everything. The critical constraint was what modern scientists call the inversion window. Once harvested, the sucrose in cane stalks begins to invert into glucose and fructose within 24 hours due to enzymes and bacteria. Without crystallization technology, sugar production was geographically capped, limited to wherever the cane grew. The process started with extraction using the kolu, a massive mortar and pestle mill powered by oxen walking in circles. Archaeological excavation in northern India have uncovered stone mortars measuring up to 12 feet, nearly 4 meters in length, permanent industrial installations where farmers brought their cane from communal processing. Speed mattered because fresh juice oxidizes rapidly, turning bitter within hours. Cooks heated the extracted juice in large open iron pans while adding lime, calcium hydroxide, which raised the pH and prevented sucrose inversion. Milk was sometimes added, its casein protein coagulating when heated to form a mesh that trapped fine impurities. Water evaporated as the syrup thickened, and at a precise temperature and concentration, crystals began forming spontaneously from the supersaturated solution. Sanskrit speakers called this product khanda. That word is a direct ancestor of candy in English. Early versions were rough brown lumps, what modern consumers would recognize as jaggery or gur. The unrefined brown sugar still common in South Asia today, and Indian chemists kept refining their techniques. One method bordered on genius. Refiners placed aquatic reeds atop the crystallized mass in earthen vessels. The plant slowly released moisture that trickled down through the sugar, dissolving the dark molasses coating each crystal without dissolving the crystals themselves. The molasses drained away through a hole in the bottom, leaving behind pure white sugar. The economics were dramatic. Roughly 220 pounds of raw cane, about 100 kilograms, yielded only 7 to 9 pounds, roughly 3 to 4 kilograms of pure white sarkara. This steep 30-to-1 compression ratio meant refined sugar effectively concentrated the value of an entire field into a tiny package. The product became so precious that builders in ancient Sri Lanka mixed sugar syrup into the lime mortar of the Ruwanwilisaya stupa around 140 BCE, using a luxury food as construction material to signal the extreme beauty and wealth of their patrons. Government regulation followed quickly. Around 300 BCE, the Arthashastra, an ancient India treatise on governance, listed distinct commercial grades of sugar with specific tax rates and quality standards for each grade. Interestingly, the tax classified sugarcane as the worst crop to cultivate, not because of low value but because of high risk. It demanded reliable irrigation, intensive labor, and protections from pests. A failed cane crop represented catastrophic loss of invested capital compared to failed millet. But the manufacturing of sugar was taxable industrial activity, categorized alongside salt and liquor, indicating that the Mauryan Empire recognized the immense value add occurring at the processing stage. From India, knowledge of crystallization spread along the ancient trade routes in every direction. The Sassanid Persians at Judishapur became master refiners, creating the conical sugar loaf that would remain the standard commercial form for more than a millennium. They built what was probably the world's first industrial sugar refinery, with water wheels along the Carbon River powering the crushing machinery. Arab armies captured Judishapur in 637 CE and acquired something more valuable than territory. They gained technology. Under the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, sugar production spread throughout the Mediterranean in what scholars now call the Islamic Agriculture Revolution. Egypt, Sicily, Cyprus, Morocco, and Al-Andalus in Spain all became sugar-producing regions. Revolutionary hydraulic technology traveled with the cane. The Noria water wheel lifted irrigation water using the river's own current, without any external power. Some of these wheels reached 65 feet, about 20 meters in diameter. By the 12th century, over 5,000 water wheels operated along Spain's Guadalquivir River alone. The Qanat system, an ancient Persian irrigation technology, transported water through underground channels across miles of desert without evaporation losses. Precision engineered at gradients as fine as 1 in 2,000. The Azikwa irrigation canals water vast plantations using gravity alone. In Valencia, farmers created the Tribunal de las Aguas, an elected water court that has met every Thursday since the 10th century to settle irrigation disputes, making it the oldest judicial institution in Europe still operating today. They measured water allocation using clepsydras or water clocks that time exactly how long each farmer's sluice could remain open. Water became tradable, bought and sold by the hour. Egypt's Nile Valley became the sugar capital of the medieval world by the 10th century. Arab chemists refined crystallization to create tambarzat, a royal white sugar so pure it commanded prices matching silver wheat for wheat. The Arabic word gandhi, meaning crystallite sugar, eventually became candy in European languages. On the other side of Asia, sugar technology arrives in China through an extraordinary act of industrial espionage. In 647 CE, Emperor Taizong dispatched the diplomats Wang Xuans and Li Bao on a mission to the court of King Harsha in northeastern India. The explicit objective? To learn the technology of sugar making. By the time Wang arrived, King Harsha had died, and his throne had been seized by a usurper. The Tang delegation was attacked, and moles were killed. Their goods were plundered. Wang Xuan escaped to Tibet, assembled a coalition army of 1,200 Tibetan mercenaries and 700 Nepalese cavalry, and returned to conquer the usurper. Among the spoils, he brought back to the imperial capital at Chang'an were captured makers of sugar. specialized artisans who possessed the tacit knowledge of crystallization chemistry, and a Brahmin alchemist named Narayana Swamin, who claimed the ability to brew a longevity elixirs. These were not common field hands. They possessed trade secrets that entire empires had failed to acquire through trade. They were installed in the imperial workshops and commanded to teach the Chinese everything they knew. The Tang transformation was remarkable. Before 647, the Chinese called sugar shimi, meaning stone honey, a rare foreign medicine, opaque and stone-like, valued primarily for treating respiratory ailments. After the technology transfer, Chinese refiners developed tangshuan, pang frost, a crystalline rock candy produced using bamboo fats, where inserted bamboo slips provided nucleation sites for crystal growth. Over days or weeks, large pure crystal would form on the bamboo, which were harvested as frost. The linguistics shift from shimi to tangshuan preserve, in the language itself, the memory of this transformation. Buddhist monasteries funded the industry's expansion through institutions called inexhaustible treasury and long-life treasury, early banking institution that provided the long-term capital needed to build mills and purchase equipment. By the 8th century, sugar production had spread throughout the southern province of Sichuan and Guangdong. Sugar remained a luxury item for centuries after European contact. Medieval laborers in England or France would have spent a full month's wages to buy a single pound, about half a kilogram. Kings sweetened their wine with it. Pharmacists dispensed it as medicine. Sculptors carved elaborate displays called subtleties for royal banquets. Intricate sugar sculptures that demonstrated both wealth and artistry. By the 14th century, Old Cairo alone operated 66 sugar refineries, permanent industrial installations processing the harvests of the Nile Valley. The Karimi merchants, a cartel of wholesale capitalists, controlled the trade from production zones in Upper Egypt to the export hub at Alexandria. They served as de facto central bankers to the Mamluk sultans, lending vast sums to finance wars while securing monopoly rights over the sugar harvest. To fund these ventures without risking personal ruin, medieval traders invented the komenda, a limited partnership where investors provided capital while traveling agents provided labor. The profit split was explicit. The investor achieved 75% of profits, while the agent took 25%. But if the ship sank, the investor lost his money while the agent lost only his time, not his assets. It was limited liability, invented 5 centuries before the modern corporation. The question that would drive 4 centuries of history was simple. How could anyone produce enough sugar to transform it from royal medicine into a commodity ordinary people could afford? The answer would come from Atlantic, and that answer would require creating a new kind of hell on earth. The Mediterranean sugar industry reached its peak on the island of Cyprus under Italian merchant control. In 1365, the Venetian banker Federico Cornaro extended a staggering loan of 60,000 ducats to the insolvent King Peter I of Cyprus. In return, Cornaro received something worth far more than the loan itself: the fief, a feudal land grant, of episcopacy with full tax exemptions, water rights, and control of the sugar mills. Within 14 years, Federico Cornaro was the richest man in Venice. At its peak, Lucine and Cyprus produced up to 500 tons, roughly 450 metric tons, of sugar annually. An archaeological excavation at Koklia Stavros, have uncovered over 30,000 pottery fragments, the remains of sugar molds and molasses jars, from this industrial operation. The Colonial arrangement created something new. A private capitalist controlling sovereign territory to run an export-oriented monoculture. This was not a medieval estate. It was a forerunner of modern corporation. A model that the Dutch and British East India companies would later replicate on the global scale. The Mediterranean had invented the template that the Atlantic would industrialize. A single vertical water wheel generated the equivalent power of 30 to 60 men, roughly 10 to 15 horsepower, removing the biological ceiling of animal traction and enabling round-the-clock production. Madeira came before the Caribbean. The Canary Islands preceded Brazil. This volcanic specks in the Atlantic Ocean became the testing ground for a system that would reshape the world. Portuguese colonists arrived on Madeira in 1425 and found an uninhabited island blanketed in dense forests. Within decades, they had stripped the island bare for plantation fuel and carved the rises into its volcanic slopes. By 1452, the first sugar mill began operating, using the same hydraulic technology that Arab engineers had perfected centuries earlier. Something new emerged on these islands that changed everything. Sugar production became an industrial process for the first time in history. The Ingenieux, the sugar works, combined agriculture harvesting with continuous factory production running around the clock. Freshly cut cane began fermenting within 24 hours, which meant harvest and processing had to run synchronized through the night during grinding season. This created an iron discipline unlike anything agriculture had seen before. Another innovation appeared on the Canary Islands and Cape Verde. Portuguese planters discovered they could purchase enslaved Africans from coastal kingdoms and transport them to the sugar islands far cheaper than recruiting free laborers from Europe. The economics were brutal, but became the model that would spread across the Atlantic. Columbus sailed west in 1492 carrying sugar cane cuttings from the Canary Islands. The Atlantic sugar machine was about to be replicated on a scale that would have seemed impossible to any previous generation. The Portuguese built something unprecedented along the coasts of northeastern Brazil. In Pernambuco, Bahia, and Rio de Janeiro, an industrial agriculture complex emerged that covered thousands of square miles and operated at a scale the ancient world could never have imagined. 60 sugar mills operated in Brazil by 1570, producing 180,000 arrobas of sugar every year, where each arroba weighed roughly 32 pounds, about 15 kilograms. 4 decades later, 400 mills turned out 2 million arrobas. Contemporary observers describe the landscape as the green sea of cane, monoculture stretching to every horizon. Technology evolved rapidly during these decades. The 3-roller vertical mill extracted far more juice than the old-age runner stones, basically large grinding wheels used in the Mediterranean, which captured only 50 to 60% of available sucrose. The new mills achieved double compression through continuous feed, running 24 hours a day during harvest. But the real breakthrough was the 3-roller mills produced drier bagasse, dry enough to burn. For the first time, sugar mills became energy self-sufficient, closing the energy loop by burning their own waste instead of consuming entire forests for fuel. In Barbados, this came too late. The island was covered in dense tropical rainforest in 1627. By 1665, less than 40 years later, it was virtually treeless. Soil exhaustion drove the movable factory logic. Consume fertility, then migrate west to Jamaica in 1655, to Saint-Domingue in 1697. Building a single engine hoe cost between 10,000 and 15,000 cruzados, equivalent to constructing an entire merchant vessels. Startups cost for a 100-acre plantation, about 40 hectares, in Barbados during 1650s, ranged from 6,000 to 10,000 pounds, the equivalent of buying a manor in England. The sugar works demanded skilled laborers as well. Master sugar boilers who understood crystallization chemistry, muleteers to transport the cane, coopers to make storage barrels, carpenters to maintain machinery. Copper boilers were the most variable movable assets of their enslaved people themselves. A single large copper could cost over 100 pounds. Enslaved labor powered the entire system. Thousands of enslaved Africans worked each plantation, enduring 18-hour days during the saffra or crushing season. Workers lost arms in the crushing rollers. Scalding syrup caused horrific burns. Exhaustion, disease, and brutal punishment claimed lives constantly. Life expectancy on a Brazilian sugar plantation often dropped below 7 years after arrival. By 1600, Brazil produced more sugar than the entire rest of the world combined. The transatlantic slave trade expanded rapidly to fit this insatiable demand. The Dutch West India Company capitalized at 7.1 million guilders, with Amsterdam and Middelburg chambers contributing the lion's share, launched a military assault on Portuguese Brazil. For 24 years, the Dutch controlled the sugar-rich northeast centered on Recife. Their contribution, though, went far beyond military conquest. Under Johan Maurits van Nassau, the Dutch administration transformed how sugar was financed. Private Dutch capital invested in Brazil exceeded 11 million guilders, nearly double the entire WIC capitalization. Systematic credit provision to planters became standard practice. Contracts for forward sale of crops were standardized across the industry. A financial architecture emerged that separated land ownership from operational management, which meant investors in Amsterdam could own shares in Brazilian plantations they would never visit. But this credit came at price. Colonial interest rates earned 10 to 18%, compared to just 4 to 6% in Amsterdam. The so-called Atlantic risk premium. By 1645, Portuguese planters owed the Dutch 36 million guilders, a debt trap that helped spark the armed revolt that eventually expelled them. Portuguese forces reconquered Brazil in 1654, and hundreds of Dutch planters, technicians, and financiers fled to the Caribbean in what historians call the diaspora of expertise. Barbados and Jamaica achieved the largest waves. These refugees brought the Brazil blueprint: cane cuttings, 3-roller mill technology, boiling house chemistry, and most importantly, the entire financial system. Dutch capital flooded into the English Caribbean in the years that followed. Amsterdam merchant banks provided the credit that built the plantation complex across Barbados, Jamaica, Saint-Domingue, and a dozen smaller islands. The transformation happened with terrifying speed. In 1627, Barbados was covered in dense tropical rainforest. By 1665, less than 40 years later, the island was virtually treeless. Its forests consumed to fuel the boiling houses. The logic was brutal but rational. An acre of sugarcane, about half a hectare, earned 40 to 50 pounds, while an acre of food crops only saved 5 to 10 pounds in import costs. Planters calculated that it was more profitable to plant every square foot in cane and import every single calorie required to feed the enslaved workforce. Sir James Strax embodied this logic perfectly. He arrived in Barbados with just 300 pounds and declared he wouldn't stop until he owned an estate worth 10,000 pounds per year. He achieved it. His property, Trex Hall, remains a functioning sugar plantation to this day. More than 3 centuries later, a testament to the durability of the capital structure he helped invent. Colonial venture capital was born during this period. The Dutch had financialized sugar production long before anyone invented that word. A machine of staggering complexity emerged from this foundation, what historians now call the triangular trade. The first leg moved manufactured goods from Europe to Africa, textiles from Manchester, weapons from Birmingham, and rum from Liverpool traveled to the West African coast, where merchants exchanged them for enslaved Africans purchased from coastal kingdoms that grew wealthy on this commerce. The second leg carried its human cargo across the Atlantic in conditions of unspeakable horror. This middle passage saw mortality rates ranging from 10% to 25%. And those who survived this crossing were sold at auction in Caribbean ports. Sugar, rum, molasses, and eventually cotton moved on the third leg back to Europe, where merchants sold the cargo at enormous profit. Those profits funded more manufactured goods or ships, more enslaved people. The cycle accelerated with each revolution. What most accounts miss about this system is that it was a trade in paper as much as goods. Credit powered everything. A Liverpool merchant could throw a bill of exchange, essentially a written promise to pay, on a Jamaica planter promising payment in 3 months. That bill could be endorsed, sold, or resold by its holder, becoming a form of money circulating through the Atlantic world. A London merchant could pay a supplier in Amsterdam using a bill backed by sugar crops still growing in Barbados fields. By the 1770s, Dutch bankers had invented something even more sophisticated: the negotiate, or plantation bond, sold to investors in Amsterdam and backed by mortgages on slave plantations in Suriname. These were mortgage-backed securities, 250 years before Wall Street reinvented them. Enslaved people themselves became financial instruments. Plantation inventories from Jamaica listed workers not just by name and task, but by precise monetary value. They could be pulled, sold, mortgaged, and pledged as loan collateral. A prime-age male was valued as a full hand, while children, women, and the elderly were rated as fractions, half hands or quarter hands. Owners applied depreciation to human capital, watching the value of their workers decline with age as they would any other machinery. The Zone Massacre of 1781, when 133 enslaved Africans were thrown overboard so their owners could file insurance claims at £30 per head, was not an aberration from the system. Insurers at Lloyd's of London controlled 33 to 40% of the entire London marine insurance market, and it was almost entirely slave trade related. The system was working exactly as designed. Rum played a crucial role in this machinery. Plantation distilleries converted waste molasses into alcohol that accounted for nearly 1/3 of total estate revenue. That rum shipped to New England, where by 1770 Massachusetts alone operated 51 distilleries churning out 2 million gallons, roughly 7.5 million liters annually. That New England rum then purchased more enslaved Africans on the coast of West Africa. The rum-sugar slave multiplier ensured the system fed itself, accelerating with each circuit. Wheels of exchange, marine insurance, commodity futures, and human-backed securities. This financial architecture became the prototype for modern global finance. Caribbean sugar profits financed the British Industrial Revolution. This remains one of the great untold stories in economic history. The Haywood family of Liverpool built their fortune on the slave trade, and the bank they founded, Haywood's Bank, became one of the largest financial institutions in the English Midlands. It provided credit to emerging industrial ventures throughout Lancashire, merged with the Bank of Liverpool in 1883, and that institution survives today as Barclays Bank. Glasgow's tobacco lords and sugar merchants financed Scotland's industrial transformation. The Glassford, Cunningham, and Spears families all traced their wealth to Caribbean plantation ownership, and they invested that wealth in cotton mills, ironworks, and railways. Arthur and Benjamin Haywood had shares in more than 125 slaving voyages, and they provided loans to James Watt for steam engine development. Thomas Leland invested in 70 voyages that transported over 22,000 Africans, and the bank he founded, Leyland and Ballance, later merged into HSBC. Caribbean Sugar Merchant Capital built the Bridgewater Canal, the infrastructure revolution that preceded the railway age. The Caribbean provided an unexpected early market for steam technology itself. Boulton and Watt, the leading steam engine manufacturers of the era, exported sugar grinding engines to plantations, where wealthy owners flush with cash could afford the premium machinery that domestic textiles mills initially resisted. When emancipation came in 1833, and slavery ended throughout the British Empire, the government paid £20 million in compensation. That figure represented roughly 40% of the entire national budget. Every penny went to the owners, nothing went to the people they had enslaved. And slavery was not dying when it was abolished. It was thriving. Profits were at their peak. It was a massive capital injection, extracted from taxpayers and immediately redirected into railways and industry. John Gladstone alone achieved over £106,000 for 2,508 enslaved people on his Jamaican sugar plantations, roughly $83 million in today's currency. That compensation went directly into the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, the world's first intercity passenger line. The Haywood family received £103,000, which became banking and insurance capital. The Lascelles received $26,000 for their partial holdings, which flowed into Sheffield Railways and property. The recipients were not only wealthy planters, middle-class freakers, widows, and shopkeepers who had held slave-backed annuities all received payouts. Across Britain, compensation money flowed into railways, canals, mines, and textiles mills. Steam alone didn't build the Industrial Revolution. Sugar built it. Napoleon Bonaparte signed the Berlin Decree in 1806, creating the continental system as an economic blockade designed to strangle British trade. An unintended consequence struck immediately. Continental Europe found itself suddenly cut off from Caribbean cane sugar. By this point, British sugar consumption had reached 30.5 pounds, about 14 kilograms per person annually, the highest in the world, and the economy depended on that colonial trade. Prices exploded across the continent. Sugar cost 5 francs per livre, a French unit of wheat, in Paris by 1812. 9 times the pre-war price of 55 centimes. By 1811, the price cap reached staggering proportions. 100 pounds of sugar, roughly 45 kilograms, in London sold for 35 shillings, while Hamburg paid 400 to 500 shillings for the same quantity, a 1000% price differential. Some German cities had no sugar available at any price. Coffee shops served desperate substitutes like honey mixed with chalk or sweet potatoes pressed into cube shapes. In Hamburg, in 1811, a father was nearly shot for attempting to smuggle a single sugar loaf. That enormous price cap created a smuggling economy of astonishing sophistication. Britain seized the tiny island of Heligoland off the German coast and transformed it into a floating warehouse, what they call Little London, one of the most profitable patches of land in the entire British Empire. Smugglers paid insurance premiums of 30 to 75% for runs into hostile ports. Bribes to French customs officials added another 15 to 20%, but a successful voyage showed stunning returns. A smuggler investing £1,900 in cargo, shipping, bribes, and insurance could sell that same cargo for £5,000 on the Hamburg black market. Net profit of £3,100, a return of 163%. The arithmetic made risk worthwhile. German chemist Andreas Markgraf had discovered back in 1747 that common beets contain the exact same sucrose molecule as sugarcane. His student, Franz Karl Archard, built a prototype beet sugar factory in Silesia in 1801. Though it remained economically marginal before the blockade, Napoleon recognized a strategic opportunity when he saw one. In 1810, he offered a price of 200,000 francs for the best sugar extraction process from indigenous plants, and massive subsidies for beet sugar development followed. By January 1812, Benjamin de Lesseps presented Napoleon with refined beet sugar at his factory, and Napoleon was so impressed that he unpinned the Legion of Honor from his own chest and pinned it directly onto de Lesseps. That same year, Napoleon ordered 100,000 hectares, about 250,000 acres, planted with sugar beets across France, established 6 technical schools that trained 100 students, and issued 500 factory licenses. French scientists raced to improve extraction processes. Jean-Baptiste Créole designed improved evaporation pans. France had over 150 beet sugar factories producing roughly 1.1 million kilograms, about 2.4 million pounds, of sugar by 1813. The state-sponsored agricultural disruption will permanently reshape global sugar geography. When Napoleon fell and the blockade ended, most observers predicted beet sugar would collapse without artificial protection, but those predictions proved completely wrong. An extraordinary technological revolution followed Napoleon's defeat, and beet sugar emerged stronger than ever. British sugar traders had actually tried to kill the technology before it matured, offering Franz Karl Archard bribes ranging from 50,000 to 200,000 dollars to declare his experiments a failure or claim beet sugar was dangerous. He refused, an early example of attempted corporate sabotage of disruptive technology. Louis de Vilmorin, a French seed merchant, applied rigorous selective breeding to sugar beets using what became known as the Vilmorin principle. He drilled tiny samples from living beet roots without killing them, then tasted the samples using a polarimeter, an optical device that measured sugar concentration by how light rotated through the solution. Only the sweetest beets were replanted for seed. This was the first industrial application of systematic progeny testing. Genetics decades before the science of heredity was understood. Sugar content rose from 4 to 6% in 1800 to 10 to 12% by 1850 and reached 16 to 19% by 1880, nearly quadrupling efficiency. By the 1860s, beet sugar had closed the natural sucrose gap with tropical sugarcane through pure laboratory science. Industrial chemistry meanwhile transformed medieval processes into modern engineering. Norbert Rilou, a brilliant mixed-race engineer from Louisiana, invented the multiple effect evaporator that used vacuum pressure to recycle heat energy, reducing fuel consumption by half. Howard's vacuum pan revolutionized crystallization by operating at lower temperatures, producing whiter and purer crystals than the old open pans. The diffusion process appeared in the 1860s, an industrial method that sliced beets into thin fish-shaped cassettes or beet chips and extracted sugar using hot water in a countercurrent system. This captured 95 to 96% of the sucrose, far exceeding all pressing methods. And the leftover beet pulp, once considered waste, solved Europe's ancient fodder gap. The winter feed shortage that had limited cattle herds from centuries. Farmers suddenly could maintain livestock year-round, producing more meat, more milk, and more manure to fertilize their fields. European governments protected their beet industries with export bounties, subsidies paid when sugar left the country. Then mechanics were cleverly designed to appear as standard tax refunds. Domestic taxes on sugar production were calculated assuming factories achieved 10% extraction efficiency. But technology had improved faster than the laws. Actual extraction reached 12%. This meant that for every ton of sugar the government thought was being produced and taxed, factories actually produced 1.2 tons. When exports qualified for tax refunds, factories collected refunds on sugar that had never been taxed. The more exported, the more profit from the state treasury. Germany alone exported 1.5 million tons, about 1.4 million metric tons, of subsidized beet sugar every year by the 1880s. The effect was perverse but deliberate. Berlin housewives paid artificially high prices of 30 to 40 marks per hundredweight, roughly £100, while the same sugar dumped on the London market for just 10 to 12 marks. German consumers subsidized British jam factories. European sugar flooded world markets at prices no Caribbean cane producer could match. Beet sugar competition combined with the aftermath of emancipation to devastate the British West Indies. Britain's Sugar Duties Act of 1846 passed out the provincial tariffs that had protected Caribbean sugar. Free trade logic held that consumers would benefit from cheaper sugar. The effect on the islands was catastrophic. Jamaica counted 653 sugar estates in 1836. By 1890, barely 100 remained operational. Production collapsed from 70,000 tons, roughly 63,000 metric tons, to just 25,000. Barbados held on longer with fewer economic alternatives, but profits there evaporated too. The West India Royal Commission of 1897 documented the wreckage in painful detail, finding a state of agriculture depression across every island. Plantations stood abandoned, reverting to bush. Workers who had fled after emancipation, seeking any alternative to labor that reminded them of slavery, now faced an economy offering nothing else. European bounties, the Commission concluded, had ruined West Indian sugar. Those subsidies functioned as trade weapons, not merely economic policy. Britain's own sugar refining industry suffered the same fate. In 1865, Britain had 25 sugar-loaf refineries. By 1879, only one remained standing. The other couldn't compete against German and Dutch refineries that received government subsidies for every pound they exported. By 1900, Britain imported 1.6 million tons, roughly 1.5 million metric tons of sugar. But only 129,000 tons came from cane sources. European beet had even penetrated India and China via the Suez Canal. The Brussels Convention of 1902 finally prohibited export bounties on sugar, the first modern multilateral trade agreement addressing subsidies. It established the precedent for anti-dumping laws and countervailing duties, taxes designed to offset foreign subsidies that will eventually evolve into World Trade Organization. Major European powers agreed to remove subsidies that had distorted world markets for decades. Free trade advocates celebrated the agreement, but by then the Caribbean sugar industry had already been reduced to a shadow of its former scale. Beet and cane would compete on roughly equal terms throughout the 20th century. In 1840, sugarcane produced 95% of world sugar. By 1900, that ratio had inverted to just 35% cane versus 65% beet. The decades of bounty-subsidized competition had permanently reshaped global sugar geography, and no convention could undo that transformation. On the other side of the world, a scientific revolution was unfolding in the Dutch East Indies, while the Caribbean withered. The island of Java became the unlikely birthplace of modern sugarcane genetics. A mysterious disease called serai devastated Java's cane fields throughout the 1880s. First reported near Cirebon in 1881, it spread east to every major sugar region by 1819. Infected plants grew stunted with leaves spreading like a fan, resembling local sorghum. Production plummeted. Combined with the global price collapse from European beet competition, the double blow in 1884 caused Java sugar prices to crash from 16 gulden, the Dutch currency, per picul, a traditional weight of about 133 pounds, or 60 kilograms, to just 7 or 8 gulden. Yield losses in infected fields ran 30 to 50%. The Java sugar industry faced extinction. The Dutch response was to institutionalize science itself. They would solve a biological problem with laboratory research. At Pasuruan in 1887, they established their booth station East Java, the East Java Experiment Station. Unlike government-funded research stations elsewhere, POG received direct funding from the sugar industry syndicate. Scientists answered to planters. Research had to produce results or funding would vanish. And funding grew dramatically as results appeared. Starting with less than 30,000 gulden in 1880s, the POG budget expanded to 1.4 million gulden by 1929. A 40-fold increase reflecting the value planters placed on their research. In 1885, a POG botanist named Saltwedel made a discovery that changed everything. Sugarcane, long assumed to reproduce only through vegetative cuttings, actually produce viable seeds. What they call fuzz, the fine seedling material. For the first time in history, deliberate breeding became possible. A decades-long program of nobilization followed, systematically crossing wild cane species called Saccharum spontaneum with sweet commercial varieties called Saccharum officinarum. The key was a peculiar genetic quirk. In this crosses, The female noble cane transmitted 8 full chromosome count, while the male wild cane contributed only half. These two amples and transmission allowed breeders to rapidly restore high sugar content while retaining disease-resistant canes. Wild canes were hardy and disease-resistant, but produced almost no sugar. Commercial varieties were sweet, but vulnerable to disease. Careful selection over multiple generations combined the best traits of both. In 1921, researchers crossed POG 2364, a Soraya-resistant hybrid with thin stalks, with EK 28, a pure noble cane with thick stalks and high sugar but no disease resistance. From 2,266 seedlings produced by that single cross, they selected one seedling that would change world agriculture. They designated it POG 2878. It became known as the Wonder Cane. POG 2878 was practically immune to Soraya disease and mosaic virus. It produced higher tonnage per hectare than any variety before it. Its sugar content matched the best traditional canes. Fast initial growth, upright stalks, clogging resistant in tropical storms. It checked every box. 90% of Java's cane fields grew POG 2878 by 1929, and yields skyrocketed. Java achieved 14.79 metric tons of sugar per hectare by 1930, over 6 tons per acre. 3 times the efficiency of Cuba at just 4 to 5 tons. By 1940, they reached 70.63 tons per hectare, about 7 tons per acre, an all-time world record. The island became the most scientifically advanced sugar producer on Earth. Tragic irony followed immediately. The Great Depression destroyed Java's market just as it perfected the technology. The Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930 closed American markets. British imperial preferences excluded Dutch sugar entirely. By 1935, Java's sugar industry had collapsed from 179 operating mills to just 35, an 83% contraction in 5 years. Production plummeted from 2.9 million tons, roughly 2.6 million metric tons, to under 500,000. And the cause wasn't technological failure. Economics had killed the industry. The OG 2878's genetic legacy endured regardless. Today, 80 to 90% of all commercial sugarcane varieties will trace their ancestry to that single seedling selected at Passeron in 1921. The Dutch gave the world its sugar genes even as their own industry collapsed around them. Sugar processing technology transformed throughout the 19th century alongside the breeding advances. The traditional plantation model, where each estate milled its own cane, gave way to the central factory system. Thermodynamics drove this transformation. Steam engines required massive capital investment but delivered power far exceeding any number of oxen. Extraction efficiency rocketed from 50 to 55% with animal-powered mills to 75 to 90% with modern steam tandems using imbibition techniques, where water was added during crushing to extract more juice. A single steam-powered central could process cane from dozens of surrounding farms. At 50 to 100 tons per hour, roughly 45 to 90 metric tons, achieving economies of scale impossible for individual plantation mills. Puerto Rico pioneered the system in 1873 with Central San Vicente. West Baton Rouge Parish in Louisiana shrank from 16 individual plantation mills in 1900 to just 2 by 1976, Cuban railroads owned by the mills extended like tentacles across the landscape, drawing cane toward ever larger centrales, or central factories. Vacuum pans and multiple evaporators transformed the boiling house. Open kettles where enslaved workers once stirred bubbling syrup give way to continuous flow systems that evaporated water efficiently while preserving sugar quality. Centrifuges adapted from dairy technology in 1850s could accomplish in minutes what weeks of molasses drainage had previously required. A paradox emerged from these innovations. Factories became more efficient while fields remained labor-intensive. Mechanized mills operated alongside hand-cut harvests, creating a stratified workforce. A small aristocracy of engineers, often imported Scots or Germans, who understood the machines, managed operation while vast numbers of field workers continued cutting cane by hand. Slavery ended and the system adapted to new labor sources. Indentured workers from India shipped to Trinidad, Fiji, and Mauritius. Chinese and Japanese contract workers arrived in Hawaii and Peru. Freed slaves in the American South and emancipated peasants in Java found themselves incorporated into new forms of coarse labor that differed from slavery in legal classification, but often not in daily experience. Financialization of sugar-rich its major form through the creation of industrial monopolies in the late 19th century. Henry Osborne Halfmayer assembled these sugar trusts in the United States. By 1907, his American Sugar Refining Company controlled 98% of all American sugar refining, a concentration rivaling Standard Oil. The trust controlled factories, but more importantly, it controlled the price spread between raw sugar and refined sugar, extracting value at the processing bottleneck. Halfmayer understood exactly where monopoly power originated. The tariff, he declared publicly, is the mother of all trusts. By lobbying Congress to maintain high duties on refined sugar, while keeping duties on raw sugar lower, the trust created a protected margin that flowed directly into profits. Klaus Spreckels built a rival empire on the West Coast, stretching from Hawaiian cane fields to California refineries. Spreckels pioneered vertical integration on a scale no one had attempted before. He built irrigation system on Maui, founded the Oceanic Steamship Company to transport cane to mainland, and constructed the world's largest sugar refinery in Philadelphia in 1888, specifically to challenge the trust's eastern dominance. By controlling water, ships, rails, and refineries together, he captured value across the entire commodity chain. He even founded Western Beach Sugar Company as a hedge against tropical demand. Henry Tate and Abram Lyle merged in Britain in 1921 to form Tate and Lyle, immediately controlling 50% of the British sugar market. Tate had invented the sugar cube. Lyle had created golden syrup with its distinctive image of peas and the lion carcass that became an iconic consumer brand. Behind that familiar image stood industrial power on the massive scale. Integrated supply chains, colonial sourcing networks, and lobbying influence that shaped British sugar policy for decades. After World War II, they successfully fought off nationalization with their famous Mr. Cube advertising campaign. The sugar cube character warning consumers against government takeover. Sugar speculation reached its peak in 1920 during an event Cuban history remembers as La Danza de los Pilones, the Dance of the Millions. During World War I, the U.S. government had controlled sugar prices through the Sugar Equalization Board, guaranteeing Cuban planters a fixed price of 5.5 cents per pound, roughly 12 cents per kilogram. This stability encouraged massive investment across the island. Cuban planters borrowed heavily to clear forests and expand cane acreage, confident in their guaranteed returns. When the war ended in 1919, price controls ended with it, and prices exploded. Cubans called it the era of vacas gordas, the fat cows. Speculation gripped the island. Sugar that had sold for 10 cents per pound in January 1920 reached an astonishing 22.5 cents per pound by May. Cuba experienced a speculative frenzy unlike anything in its history. Mansions rose in value. Planters imported champagne by the case. Banks lent recklessly against sugar inventories valued at big price, confident the boom would continue. The bubble burst with devastating speed. European beet production recovered faster than anyone expected, and suddenly, the artificial shortage evaporated. By August, prices had fallen to 11 cents. By November, it is 4.75 cents. And by December 1920, prices has collapsed to under 3 cents. An 85% decline in 7 months. Financial destruction was total. 20 Cuban banks failed, including Banco Nacional de Cuba, Banco Español, and Banco Internacional. Planters who had borrowed against sugar at 22 cents couldn't repay loans, and their collateral was worth 3 cents. North American banks, including National City Bank of New York, which later became Citibank, and Royal Bank of Canada, foreclosed on defaulted loans and acquired past Cuban properties for pennies on the dollar. The dance of the millions transferred ownership of Cuban sugar from Cuban hands to Wall Street. By 1929, American Sugar Refining Company alone controlled 500 square miles, roughly 1,300 square kilometers, of Cuban land and 191 miles, about 307 kilometers, of private railroad. When Castro's revolution nationalized foreign assets in 1959, it was addressing an ownership structure that had been established 4 decades earlier in a speculative collapse. The catastrophe led Congress to pass the Jones-Costigan Act in 1934, which classified sugar as a basic commodity, established quota system allocating market shares, and effectively ended the free market in American sugar. The Secretary of Agriculture literally determined Cuba's GDP. The OPEC oil embargo of 1973 sent shockwaves through the global economy, and the impact proved more transformative in Brazil than anywhere else. Brazil imported 80% of its oil at that time, and the price shock threatened to derail the country's industrialization while exploding its foreign debt. The military government decided to pursue energy independence and launched an odious program called Proalcool, the National Alcohol Program. The concept was simple but revolutionary. Convert sugar cane into ethanol and use that ethanol to fuel automobiles. Brazil already possessed a massive sugar industry. The same mills producing crystalline sucrose could be adapted to produce liquid fuel instead. Subsidized credit flowed into distillery construction. Petrobras, Brazil State Oil Company, guaranteed ethanol distribution at filling stations nationwide. Volkswagen, GM, Ford, and Fiat all received incentives to produce vehicles capable of running on pure ethanol. Fiat launched the 147 in 1979, the first mass-market ethanol car anywhere in the world. By 1985, ethanol vehicles had captured 92% of Brazilian new car sales, an unprecedented market transformation anywhere in the world. Production surged from 0.6 billion liters in 1975 to 12.7 billion liters, roughly 3.4 billion gallons, a decade later. Ethanol prices were kept by low at 65% of gasoline. Brazil had created the world's first renewable fuel economy, and the world was watching. Crisis struck in what Brazilians called the lowest decade of the 1980s. Global oil prices collapsed in 1986 at exactly the moment sugar prices spiked. Mill owners made their rational economic choice to divert their cane to sugar production for export, and domestic ethanol farms ran dry. Consumers stranded with ethanol-only vehicles they couldn't fuel abandoned the technology in frustration. The government dismantled the sector regulator, IAA or Alcohol Institute, and deregulated the market. By the late 1990s, pure ethanol vehicle sales had fallen to nearly zero. Solution came in 2003 with flex fuel vehicle. Brazilian engineers developed engines capable of running on any combination of gasoline and ethanol, letting consumers choose at the pump based on current prices. The 70% rule emerged from consumer behavior. Since ethanol contains roughly 70% of gasoline's energy density, drivers buy ethanol whenever it costs less than 70% of gasoline's price. Today, over 80% of Brazilian light vehicles are flex fuel. Brazil produces more than 30 billion liters, roughly 8 billion gallons of ethanol annually. The flex mill has evolved into a sophisticated arbitrage machine that toggles production between sugar and ethanol based on real-time commodity prices, hedging against volatility in either market. Brazilian sugarcane ethanol delivers remarkable efficiency that goes far beyond simply being renewable. The science explains why. Photosynthesis is at the heart of it. Sugarcane uses what botanists call the C4 photosynthetic pathway, a mechanism that concentrates carbon dioxide in specialized cells and allows the plant to convert sunlight into biomass roughly 50% more efficiently than most other plants. Corn, by contrast, stores its energy as starch that requires energy-intensive processing to convert into fermentable sugars. Sugarcane stores its energy as sucrose that yeast can ferment directly. The energy return on investment tells the story. For every unit of fossil energy invested in Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, accounting for fertilizers, tractors, and transport, the system returns between 6.5 and 8.2 units of renewable energy. American corn ethanol achieves a ratio of only 1.3 to 1.6. The difference is structural. Bagasse holds the key to this efficiency. That fibrous residue left after juice extraction gets burned in high-pressure boilers that generate steam to power electricity turbines. Modern sugarcane mills are completely energy self-sufficient. Many export surplus power to the national grid, particularly during Brazil's dry season when hydroelectric reservoirs run low. The climate benefits are substantial. Sugarcane ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions by 61 to 80% compared to gasoline. Corn ethanol manages only 20 to 46%. This biophysical superiority is structural and permanent, built into the plant's basic biology. Brazil pioneered the financialization of decarbonization itself, turning sustainability into a tradable commodity. The country enacted Renovável, the national biofuels policy, in 2017. Unlike the old pro-alcohol program that focused on volumetric production mandates, Renovável targets carbon intensity directly. The goal is reducing transportation sector carbon intensity in accordance with Brazil's Paris Agreement commitments. The mechanism functions elegantly. Biofuel producers received certification based on their life cycle carbon efficiency, calculated using a standardized carbon accounting tool called EarnOverCalc. A mill that uses biofertilizers, generates its own electricity from waste heat, and transport ethanol by pipeline earns a lower carbon intensity score than a competitor relying on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers and truck transport. For each ton of carbon dioxide emissions avoided compared to the fossil fuel baseline, certified producers issue instruments called CBOs, decarbonization credits, which trade on Brazil's B3 stock exchange, the country's main securities market. Fossil fuel distributors face a legal requirement to purchase enough CBOs to meet annual reduction targets. This structure creates a direct financial incentive for efficiency improvements. More sustainable production generates more carbon credits. More carbon credits generate more revenue. RenovaBio has monetized sustainability in a way that aligns economic incentives with environmental outcomes. Stringent rules prevent what economies call leakage. Only biomass produced on land with zero deforestation after 2018 qualifies for CBO generation. This creates a financial firewall against Amazon's destruction, making forest clearing economically counterproductive for biofuel producers. First-generation ethanol uses only the sugarcane juice, roughly one-third of the plant's total energy. The other two-thirds remain locked in the fibrous bagasse and straw. Second-generation technology is unlocking the potential through pretreatment and enzymatic hydrolysis, where specialized enzymes break down plant fibers, cellulose converts into fermentable sugars. The result is 50% more ethanol from the same land without any expansion of agricultural footprint. Second-generation ethanol achieves carbon reduction exceeding 80% compared to gasoline, roughly 30% better than first-generation ethanol, making it a premium product for jurisdiction with strict low-carbon fuel standards like California and the European Union. Raízen, a joint venture between Shell and Brazilian conglomerate Cosan and the world's largest sugar and ethanol producer, opened the Bonfim plant with 82 million liters, roughly 22 million gallons of annual capacity, currently the world's largest second-generation ethanol facility. The company has announced plans for 20 such plants by 2030. Shell has committed to purchasing 3.25 million liters, approximately 860 million gallons of cellulosic ethanol under long-term contract. The ultimate destination for this technology may be the sky. The aviation industry has committed to net zero emission by 2050. Yet no electric airplane solution exists for long-haul flights. Batteries are simply too heavy. Sustainable aviation fuel is the only viable path forward. The alcohol-to-jet pathway converts ethanol into jet fuel through a series of chemical transformations. Brazil's massive ethanol surplus positions the country as what analysts increasingly call the Saudi Arabia of SAF. The 2024 fuel of the future law established mandatory aviation emissions reductions at 1% by 2027, rising to 10% by 2037. Industry projections put the global SAF market at $15.85 billion by 2030. Brazil is positioned to capture a major share of that market, not by drilling for oil beneath its soil, but by growing grass above it. The traditional sugar factory will be obsolete by 2050. Something called a biorefinery will replace it, evolving ultimately into what engineers envision as the circular biopark, an integrated complex that extracts maximum value from every fraction of the sugar cane plant. The biopark of the future produces sugar for food markets. It produces first-generation ethanol for the domestic flex fuel vehicle fleet. Second-generation ethanol goes to export markets with premium low-carbon requirements. Bioelectricity flows from burning bagasse to generate power for the national grid. Biomethane from fermented vinasse, a byproduct of ethanol distillation, replaces diesel fuel in agricultural machinery working in the cane field. Sustainable aviation fuel supplies the global airline industry. Carbon credits monetized through B3 and voluntary markets provide an additional revenue stream. Market projections show this circular economy chemicals growing from $228 billion in 2024 to over $800 billion by 2034. The transformation extends even further than fuel and electricity. Sugarcane already dominates global bioplastic feedstock, accounting for 41% of the total. Braskem produces biopolyethylene, plastic that is chemically identical to petroleum-based PE but synthesized from renewable carbon, targeting 1 million tons, roughly 900,000 metric tons, of annual production by 2030. Their products go to Coca-Cola, Lego, and Nike. The bioplastics market is growing at nearly 20% annually, projected to reach $44.77 billion by 2030. Gasification of bagasse or electrolysis powered by electricity generated from waste can produce green hydrogen for sectors that resist electrification, like steel and cement manufacturing. Projections suggest sugarcane-derived hydrogen could cost between $1.50 and $3 per kilogram, roughly 68 cents to $1.36 per pound, making it the cheapest non-fossil hydrogen source, competitive with gray hydrogen produced from natural gas. Precision fermentation represents another frontier, and the market is exploding. Genetically engineered microbes feed on sugarcane sugars and produce proteins indistinguishable from dairy, without any cows involved. This sugar-to-protein pathway could transform the entire food system. The precision fermentation market is projected to reach $34 billion by 2032, growing at over 40% annually. Even the ash left after bagasse combustions finds commercial use as a partial replacement for mineral filler in rolled asphalt, creating infrastructure with a lower carbon footprint. Meanwhile, a new generation of sugarcane is emerging. Energy cane, hybrids of Sycarum spontaneum, bred specifically for biomass rather than sugar content. These varieties achieve yields of 167 tons per hectare, about 74 tons per acre, compared to 107 tons per hectare, roughly 48 tons per acre, for commercial sugarcane. They have higher fiber content, deeper root system for better carbon sequestration, and thrive on marginal land where food crops struggle. Scientists are pushing the boundaries even further with genetic engineering. Using CRISPR gene editing technology, researchers are developing what they call oil cane, a modified sugarcane variety that accumulates up to 20% oil in its stalk alongside sugar, a single plant that produces sweetener and biodiesel feedstock simultaneously. The fermentation step is bypassed entirely for fuel production. The sugarcane plant of 2050 is not just a source of sweetness. It functions simultaneously as a renewable oil well, a pharmaceutical factory, and the carbon sink, all packaged in a single biological organism. By mid-century, engineers envision facilities achieving negative carbon status through bioenergy carbon capture and storage. BECCS actually removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere while producing energy and materials. 10,000 years ago in the swamp of New Guinea, Neolithic farmers began selecting for sweetness. We have traced sugar journey along Austronesian canny routes, through Indian chemical laboratories where crystallization was first mastered, across the hydric empires of Islam that spread cultivation through the Mediterranean and into the tropical hell of Atlantic slavery that peeled the modern world. Sugar financed the Industrial Revolution. Beet sugar rose to Chilean's cane sugar. Science at Pasaran in Java created the genetic foundation that underlies all modern sugarcane varieties. Brazil's ethanol program transformed a sweetener into a transplantation fuel, and that fuel is now being reimagined as the molecular building block for a post-petroleum economy. The paradox at the heart of this story is profound. A crop that caused what may be the greatest concentrated human suffering in recorded history. The Middle Passage, the plantation complex, the deliberate destruction of entire peoples. That same crop now offers pathways toward decarbonization and environmental sustainability. The molecule itself hasn't changed. C12H22O11, sucrose. What changed is our understanding of what can be built from it. The question from the coming century is not whether sugarcane will remain relevant. It will. The question is whether humanity can construct an industry around this plant that serves human flourishing rather than human exploitation. The answer is not written in the chemistry. It never has been. The answer lies in the choices we make, the system we design, the values we choose to encode in law and practice, and the futures we allow ourselves to imagine. Sugarcane provides the raw material. What we build from it remains up to us.